Welcome to the Astrology Star Sisters. Today's topic is Winter Solstice 2024. My friend and colleague and star sister, Madam Simon, is here joining me today, and I'm Elizabeth Liz Machette. Welcome, Simon. How are you doing today?
Much better now that I'm here.
Well, happy solstice.
And a blessed solstice to you too, and to all.
Thank you. So, Madam Simon, her website is iconalchemy.com, and my website is alightpath.com, and we enjoy hearing from you. And we're talking about winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere. So, do you want to jump in?
Well, the solstice is when in the summer it reaches its maximum declination, and in the winter when it reaches its minimum declination, in this case, from the standpoint of the Northern Hemisphere. If we were in the Southern Hemisphere, this would be the summer solstice rather than the winter solstice. And so basically, the sun kind of, it doesn't stay at the same level from our perception. And as I understand it, this is because the Earth kind of wobbles as it's traveling around the sun. And so we get the sun appears to go further south in the winter and appears to come further north in the summer for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere. And in the Southern Hemisphere, it's the opposite effect. So.
And then the word solstice in Latin is sol is for the sun, and sistere, I don't know if I said that right, and I made a typo with a space in there, is to stand still. And it's the beginning of winter, and you can finish.
It's the longest night of the year, and it begins the lengthening of the days. Effectively, the sunlight is starting to come back, even though it's the beginning of winter. That might seem counterintuitive, but it's like the warmth needs time to catch up, but the light is returning.
And then I found a quote here for solstice. The winter solstice has always been special to me as a barren darkness that gives birth to a verdant future beyond imagination, a time of pain and withdrawal that produces something joyfully inconceivable, like a monarch butterfly, masterfully extracting itself from the confines of its cocoon, bursting forth into unexpected glory. And that's by Gary Zukav. Do you want to tell us about Capricorn?
Capricorn is a cardinal earth sign. Cardinal energy is initiatory energy. It starts things. It is adapting to circumstances, and it has a restless quality to it. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, Lord of Karma, Cosmic Taskmaster, Lord of Time, who governs boundaries and endings, but also structures, and is, interested in getting us to cultivate our self-discipline. And so Capricorn can be associated with discipline, with rules, regulations, societal structures like the government. It is can be perceived as being realistic, grounded, dependable, steady, patient. It's goal-oriented. And then the caution to that would be that it is prone to workaholism. Stoicism is not inherently a bad thing, but it can effectively put on that stoic mask in a way as a means of hiding feelings and not being in touch with them. And it can be rigid and depressive. So.
Thank you. And winter solstice, December 21st, when the sun ingresses into the sign of Capricorn at 00 Capricorn in 00 minutes, and we're using the chart for Greenwich time and or universal time, and that was at 9:21 a.m. And in the Pacific Standard Time, it's 1:21 a.m. and Eastern Standard Time, it was 4:21. And on this chart, you can see the sun is circled in a pink color, and it's in the 12th house of where it likes quiet and seclusion. I call it the cave, you know. So it's, in the Northern Hemisphere, the sun isn't giving us as much light as we have in the summertime, that's for sure. Do you want to say anything about this chart?
Well, it's interesting because the 12th house, while we certainly can associate it with solitude and seclusion, it should be remembered that when the sun is in the 12th house, we can't see, not because it's dark, but because the sun has just come up over the horizon and is blinding. So yes, there's that solitary quality, and those who get up around sunrise will find that the world tends to be rather quiet in that space of the 12th house, where yes, there's this brilliant light coming up over the horizon, but everything else hasn't really gotten moving yet, other than those pesky early morning birds. And so there is that kind of stillness there. I actually find it, that 12th house and that early morning space is that moment when we can collect our thoughts away from everybody else.
We have a comment that they said that they love what you said.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So, so the sun is in the 12th house at this time. And that may be solitary, but it can also be that space where we really get a sense of what we're getting ready to do.
Kind of the quiet time in the morning before it gets busy.
Yep.
So when the sun ingresses into Capricorn, the ascendant for Greenwich time is 18 degrees Capricorn, and the midheaven is 23 degrees Scorpio, because I like to look at those charts. So if I remember right, the cardinal energy on the ascendant for a solstice or equinox chart, this energy will last 3 months, since we have a cardinal sign on the ascendant, if I remember the rule right. And I think I do. So this energy will last for the next 3 months until we move into spring equinox. Anything you'd like to comment on this chart?
Yes, so ingress charts like this can be used as sort of predictors of the quality of time between the cardinal points. So yes, we can kind of, excuse me, look at this as giving us, thank you, as giving us a sense of the quality of time over the course of the next 3 months. So I find that interesting that this winter, then we would have that, first of all, Capricorn at the ascendant can lead people to be goal-oriented, to be hardworking, to be concerned with sort of taking the long view. I know multiple Capricorn ascendants, since I have a Capricorn sun. I draw a lot of Capricorn ascendant friends to me. And my goodness, they work so hard. But they're also, pragmatic and oriented toward what is the long haul, what is that path, as opposed to instant gratification. So this is a great time then for us to be seeding our plans. I like to think of this as that space in which, like, some seeds take a longer time to germinate. And so it's like we're putting those long germinating seeds into the ground right now. And then between now and the spring, they're going to sit there in the darkness and get themselves ready to burst forth in the spring. So,
well said. Okay, and then in this chart we have a T square with the Sun in Capricorn square the nodes in Aries and Libra. What would you say about that?
oh. So, when anything is square to the nodes, it is said to be at the bendings of the nodes. And it can feel like whatever that body is sort of operating in a way that is separate from the normal course of things. And that can be, sometimes that being separate from is like we're getting a little bit of distance from the normal course of things so that we're observing that course from outside of it. Sometimes it can feel like the concerns of that body are a distraction. The nodal axis is considered to be the karmic arc, where our path has come from for the south node and where it is going to. And note that doesn't mean that either the north node or the south node is better. They're part of the whole of our path. And where we come from is every bit as important as where we're going. That's a very Capricornian perspective now that I think about it. Capricorn can be very concerned with tradition, with heritage, with ancestry. Okay. But with the sun in the 12th house of this chart, and at the bendings of the nodes, I really do feel like this is kind of a prime observational position, especially from that space of the 12th house, to be with ourselves in the silence before things get busy, really taking a good look at what is our karmic path, but also what is the path of the world around us, but not from this standpoint of like, oh, I'm in the thick of what the world's doing. So, there's that what is that phrase, in the world but not of it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I feel like this is perhaps of the world but not in it. Okay.
Well,
that we know, we see the stuff that's going on, but we're not having our heads spun about by it.
Well, and I want to point out that any cardinal point at 0 degrees is considered the Aries point, and the nodes are very close to that. They're, at 2 degrees, so they're within 2 degrees of that, and so those nodes are really, really close to that 0 point, the Aries point, and it's going to be activated over and over and over for the rest of December and into January, most of January also. So there's going to be a lot of activation, and even throughout 2025 there'll be some activation because Neptune will get to 0 Aries and Saturn will get to 0 Aries and go back and forth. So to me that's a big reset, redo, rework. So it's like kind of getting us prepared for that. So start releasing what doesn't work for you, that you don't need or you don't want, to make room for the new.
Yes.
Any other
And
comment?
yeah, just a comment about when we think of resetting things, humans can be kind of change averse because change can feel scary sometimes. And the year ahead is definitely a year of big changes, with so much that is going to be going across that Aries point. But I would like to remind people, lots of folks think of Aries in terms of, it's ruled by Mars. It can be kind of belligerent. It has a fighting spirit to it. But it's also youngest sign. And so it has a childlike quality to it, as well as that kind of more boss-oriented quality that we often think of it having. And so I would like us to consider that this reset, even when it comes with challenges, even when we have to muster up our fighting spirit to deal with the circumstances around us, Aries wants nothing more than to set off on the grand adventure and to be the big damn hero. So this is an opportunity for us to be heroes in our own lives and to have a grand adventure and to do so with fellow heroes. I'm a gaming geek. So I'm totally thinking of like the D&D party setting out on a big adventure. And I would like that very much to be kind of our archetype for the year ahead. But right now, we're in that space where we're planning what we're going to do in order to have the best adventure possible.
I like that, to make space for your new adventure. That's wonderful. Okay, now we have a mutable Grand Cross. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's see. We've got Mercury in Sagittarius is now finally is direct, still in the shadow period, but direct. And for this chart, the moon in Virgo, which is ruled by that Mercury, is squared by Mercury and is opposing Jupiter in Gemini, which is also ruled by that Mercury. And then, the Mercury and Jupiter are squaring Saturn, which is in Pisces, and that is classically ruled by Jupiter. So there's this, as is that Mercury in Sagittarius. So there's this heavy, yes, there's a Saturnian energy to it, especially because that Saturn is ruling the sun. Okay. It rules Capricorn, but in a way that Saturn is answering to Jupiter because it's in Jupiter's home sign. And the mutual reception between Mercury and Jupiter continues. That's been, it's colored a lot of the past month, that mutual reception, and now it's continuing. And while they are both considered to be in detriment, they're in places where they don't really have the resources that they normally like to have. Nonetheless, Jupiter's jovial, and Mercury's a trickster, but Mercury really just is along for the ride and wants to do whatever the planet that has the most influence on it wants to do. And that being Jupiter, who's a benefic, they're still going to try to bring good things to us. Now, a mutable Grand Crosses can have us feeling like we're pulled in all four directions at once, right? But they also are engaging all four elements at once. They're engaging all of the portions of our lives and our psyches that correspond to those elements. Okay, the fire element being action, the earth element being our physical resources, our bodies, our practicality, the air element being our minds, and the water element being our emotions. Okay, so our thoughts are active. Our bodies are concerned with practicality, but also habits, good health, good food, but maybe not too much of it. Virgo tends to be diet oriented, right? Jupiter, our faith, our hope, is excited about all the information that's presenting itself to us. And Saturn in Pisces is like, okay, yes, there's lots of stimulation, but try to have an emotional grip on things. Like, just be patient and steady, and you're going to manage as long as you are, as long as you persist and try to have some measure of self-discipline, and not go overboard with anything. So, grand crosses can often be very challenging, but this being a mutable one, the real challenge, I think, is not to get lost in what I call scattered squirrel mind, which I tend to be guilty of. That ADHD kind of mind. To not get lost and running around chasing after every new shiny thing, and instead be good to our bodies, pay attention to sticking to good habits and cultivating good habits, not going overboard on holiday goodies, and to be patient. To be patient and steady and just persevere if anything gets challenging.
Well, and that mutable energy is asking us to tie up loose ends, finish up on some projects, finish up the details so that you can move on to the next thing. And this Grand Cross will basically just last a day because the moon will move on, and then it's a T-square between Jupiter opposite Mercury, and they're both square to Saturn. So that T-square will still be active for a while, asking us to make adjustments. And then we have a Thor's hammer. So would you like to talk about that?
So that one's interesting because it's the moon, which moves quickly, so it's not a long-lasting Taurus hammer, but it is here at the solstice point, or at the ingress. Okay, and so it is coloring what is to come, even if it is not a long-lasting configuration. And it's the moon square Jupiter. So again, I very much feel like that is, you may find yourself getting overstimulated, or tempted by, too many good things, too much fun, whatever. And you may need to kind of, slow down, back off, back away from the fruitcake or whatever. and try to pace yourself. But what's interesting about that is that the apex point of this Taurus hammer is Pluto. And Pluto is a transgenerational planet, right? A transpersonal planet, I should say. It marks a generation. It moves very slowly as one of the outer planets. And so it remains in whatever sign it's going to be in for a long time. In this case, it's in Aquarius. It's going to be in Aquarius for the next 20 years. Okay. And so Pluto, being a transpersonal planet, doesn't, it would not feel the pressure of that moon and Jupiter the way another planet would feel pressure being at the apex of the Taurus hammer. Taurus hammer typically puts tremendous pressure on the apex planet, sometimes survival level fear. Okay. And so it's a configuration that can be kind of anxiety producing at times. But here it is where the apex planet is not something that is likely to get anxious about much of anything. Okay, Pluto, being the lord of the underworld, has seen it all and is so not interested in worrying or fussing about these things. And yet, as a generational planet, as a transpersonal planet, it does affect the zeitgeist. It does have an effect on kind of the world consciousness or unconsciousness. And so I find that really interesting. Pluto is transformational. So can be this impetus for change. Now, in a fixed sign, it's not likely that there's going to be sudden changes resulting from this. But I do have to wonder kind of what's the butterfly effect that's going on here? The ripples that might spread outward as a result of Pluto being that apex planet. And what are the deep transformations within society that might be being triggered during these next 3 months that we may not get a visual on anytime soon, and yet are moving things perhaps quite profoundly?
It makes me think of planting the seed, and it's going to take a little while for it to manifest or produce or grow. So it's kind of like it might be so subtle you didn't even notice it if something that occurs around this time.
Right. But I do feel like this is a societal influence more than a personal influence because of Pluto being transpersonal. And yet, the moon is one of the planets affecting it. So it is, what are we doing on personal levels that may have effects in the zeitgeist that are happening underneath the surface?
We'll have to see down the road. And then we come to a mystic rectangle. Go ahead.
So, as you might gather here, mystic rectangles are oppositions, two oppositions that are connected by sextiles and trines. Okay, and one of those oppositions, okay, that's the nodal axis. That's always an opposition. Okay, but the other is Mars is retrograde and is reapplying to the opposition that it had with Pluto back right before the US election. Okay, this was on the 3rd of November. Pluto was in Capricorn at the time. Mars was in the last degree of Cancer. And now they've switched signs, switched elements, okay, switched modalities from cardinal to fixed. But this is the second of 3 oppositions between Mars and Pluto. The exact opposition is going to be, I believe, on January 2nd. And then there will be one more at, I think, the end of April. And so we're looking at a repetition that is bringing up stuff from November. Okay. And since it's fixed energy, it's not quite so, there can be something a little kind of frantic sometimes about cardinal energy. When you've got an opposition like that, where you really want to be able to get something done, but these 2 planets are at loggerheads. Whereas in fixed planets, it's more, okay, they're at loggerheads and neither one is going to back down, but there's something more stable, I guess, about the fixed energy. Now, this is Mars in Leo versus Pluto in Aquarius, and Mars in Leo definitely challenges us with regard to how are we showing up in the world. How does the way that we show up affect how we get what we want? Okay, so if we're showing up, kind of half-hearted, maybe we don't get what we want, right? So we need to kind of put our hearts into it. But let's face it, world and national events being what they are, some of us are kind of exhausted. And so, with Mars in retrograde, then we can consider, okay, how can I find ways to show up despite being exhausted? And I may not have to do that right now because Mars is retrograde, but come April, I may need to step up in a big way. So now, between now and then, I have an opportunity to get a sense of what changes can I make in order to show up in a way that is going to be conducive to getting what I want. But here's the thing: Mars opposing Pluto is opposing, a force that shows what is ripe for transformation, where the power structures are, especially power structures that are not obvious or not visible. What are the power dynamics within our communities, within our society? Aquarius is very much about groupthink and consensus reality. Aquarius is ruled by Capricorn classically, and then modern astrologers will say that Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, great change maker, the great liberator. And so I very much look at this combination as Saturn. To me, it's Saturn's sign, but Aquarius has an affinity for it. Okay. And so that describes a push-pull within society. Because on one hand, there needs to be some measure of stability in society for it to continue, for it to perform its functions. Okay. There needs to be some level of consensus where we agree these are society's rules. This is how our society operates. And yet, the society will not learn, change, grow, improve. We will not have a future if individuals within that society do not sometimes challenge that society and say, hey, guess what? These rules suck. These rules are ripe for change. This governmental body is corrupt. This leader no longer deserves to have us follow them. Okay. Those are some of the more intense challenges to society, but sometimes it's something as simple as, oh, hey, this disease would be better treated if we utilized this remedy that I just came up with, and then the group kind of, looks at it and goes, oh yeah, that's kind of a good remedy, or, oh no, you need to go back to the drawing board on that one. Okay. That's the process with Aquarius. And the evolution of all of humanity is something that Aquarius is concerned with. And yet that evolution is highly dependent upon the evolution of the individual. Okay? Society is not going to move forward if the individual does not move forward. Okay. So here we have then this Mars-Pluto opposition where Mars is saying, okay, I got to reconsider how am I showing up, because how I tried to change society before, or how I tried to deal with the power structures around me, or, I fought the law and the law won, right? Well, if I want to change the law, or if I want to change the society, if I want things to improve, then I'm going to have to change how I show up. But meanwhile, those power structures are continuing to dig in because they don't want to change. Okay? Humans are change averse. We get all resistant and mulish. Okay? So this can be a real showdown, except here it is in the context of this mystic rectangle. Okay? And it's a mystic rectangle with the nodes. So there feels like something very fateful about this. Okay? This is a karmic showdown. And it's one where actually there's some supports, there's some help. Mars is getting some help from that South Node, which is like, hey, if you want to show up better, you're going to need to be willing to throw away some stuff, to let go of some ways of behaving. Okay. Pluto, on the other hand, is getting help from that North Node, which is like, oh, you want to keep things the way that they are, but still show us like all the things that need to be improved. Here is this karmic direction that we're all going in, where we're feeling big, fateful stuff on the world stage, on the national stage, but also in our local communities. Okay. How does that show up? And the more that it feels like it's a matter of fate and a matter of what is our destiny, what kind of future are we creating for the entire world, then the more, interestingly enough, that the things that we don't like are going to be more obvious. The things that are ripe for transformation, the things where we could make a huge difference if we can muster the will and the drive to change these things. And then we've got those trines there. Okay. The trine from the South Node to Pluto is like, yeah, there's a bunch of things that need to be discarded. There are behaviors, social mores that are ripe for transformation, that need to be let go of. Maybe it's maybe the ways in which we have waged war or peace need to be changed. That's a big one. Maybe there are injustices that need to be resolved. Maybe the way that we treat justice versus the desire for social harmony needs to be reevaluated. Okay. And then Mars is getting that trine to the North Node, which is in a Mars-ruled sign, Aries, which is just like, yeah, go for it. It is time to get going and to make big changes and to do the things that are going to help create the society that we desire, to create the individual lives that we desire, because it's an Aries, which is very individual. Okay. And so all of these things are interconnected. This is a real, the personal is political kind of configuration.
Well, and it's really interesting that the nodes are involved in this mystic rectangle and the T-square to the sun. So the nodes look like they're very, very active and so close to that Aries point. So, that even reinforces that Aries point of, this is the time to start integrating the change. So thanks for sharing. Anything else you want to say about this chart?
It's a great chart for incubating big change in the future, because that sun in that 12th house, looking at that mystic rectangle, but also, within the context of that Cardinal Grand Cross as well. That mutable Grand Cross, sorry. That mutable Grand Cross is busy, but that sun is very still, just watching what's going on.
Be observant.
Yeah.
So now we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk about Jupiter and Saturn's relationship. Jupiter and Saturn met in the sky, conjunct, and they conjunct about every 20 years. And the last conjunction was December 21st of 2020. And now on December 24th, we'll be at the second first quarter square. And the first contact for the first quarter square was August 19th of this year. And the third one will be June 15th of 2025. And then the opposition will happen in 2029. So that we'll come back to that one in a few years and talk about that one. And so you want to talk about Jupiter and Saturn here?
So Jupiter is considered to be the greater benefic. And Saturn is considered to be the greater malefic. They are the social planets. So the personal planets would be Mercury and Venus and Mars inside the asteroid belt. And then just outside of the asteroid belt, we have Jupiter and Saturn, who are the last two of the traditional planets before we move into the territory of the transpersonal planets, the outer planets. Okay. Jupiter governs our luck, our faith, religious and spiritual, but also simply our faith that things are going to work out all right, that we're up to the task ahead of us, that good things are possible. So Jupiter governs hope, is expansive, idealistic, philosophical, joyful, jovial. Is a word stemming from Jupiter. Okay. Saturn, on the other hand, is more serious, is associated with structure, with restriction, limitation, as the last of the traditional planets, the last planet that we can consistently see with the naked eye. Saturn marks boundaries and endings. And therefore, that can be endings of good things. That can be endings of, that can be the ending of life. That can be the ending of, a good run of luck. Okay. And so there is an association for Saturn with hardship. Okay. Both of these planets can relate to teaching, and to authority. But Jupiter is kind of that benevolent authority, whereas Saturn can be seen as a more punitive authority. Saturn is very much associated with hard reality. Okay. Saturn can be, sometimes seen as a bit of a, the boogeyman of the planets. But at the same time, I like to remind people that Saturn's not out to be a jerk. If you actually look at the planet Saturn, at the poles, particularly at the North Pole of Saturn, but you see it on both poles, if I remember correctly, there are these hexagonal shaped storms. Okay. And the hexagon is associated with, first of all, it's a six-sided shape, okay, which we see that in beehives, okay, and that six-sided shape is considered to be very stable. It is community-oriented. It's also, the sixes are associated with the Lover's card in tarot. So I like to say big bad boogeyman Saturn is crowned with love. Okay. Not out to get you, just challenging you to deal with things that you might normally wish to avoid or not deal with, so that you can cultivate patience and perseverance and self-discipline. Saturn as governing structure literally governs the skin and bones in medical astrology. Okay, our physical container. Okay, so here are these two, then, this greater benefic and this greater malefic, these two social planets who, help us to move beyond what is merely personal into how are we dealing with our community? How are we moving around in the world? If we have too much hope and expansion, then we're not very grounded or realistic. And if we have too much fear and insecurity and kind of depressive qualities, then we don't get very far. We need a combination of these two. Now, when they're trine or sextile, then they're getting along well, and there's a nice even flow between the real and the ideal. When they're at hard aspects, it's much more challenging to figure out how do we balance faith and fear, expansion and restriction, idealism and realism. That's what these squares are about for us, kind of duking it out between our hope and our fear. And so, especially around the holiday times, I think that this is a somewhat rough transit for us to be experiencing. It's useful in terms of our long-term perception of things to, kind of work out, okay, where have I been unrealistic in my hopes, but also where have I been excessive in my fears? Okay. Those are useful things to consider, even if they can feel kind of rough at times. But for this second square to be happening right around the holidays may be harder on us than we would like. For some people, the holidays are wonderfully jovial. Okay. We've got this moving from Sagittarius season into Capricorn season, from Jupiter, a Jupiter ruled sign, into a Saturn ruled sign. And that does correspond to, the holidays. We kind of build up this, happy, joyful, bright, merry way of being. And then, oh, that's right, we get plunged into the cold of winter. Okay. And so, there's that combination there. But I think it's important for us to remember that not everybody finds the holidays to be joyful. Okay. Lots of people struggle during the holidays, whether they, are estranged from their families, or they're experiencing financial hardships that the holidays make more obvious. Okay. And so for this square to be happening right now, I think it really does throw that into like sharp contrast between what is our kind of typical way of viewing the holiday season versus what is the hard reality for lots of people. And so with this transit, as with that experience or set of experiences, having as much compassion as we can for ourselves and for our neighbors right now is extra important this year with this square. It is important for us to recognize that we all at some point in time struggle with this push-pull, this dichotomy between these two forces in our lives. These two forces operate in everybody's lives to some degree. And we don't know what struggles other people are going through behind a jovial face.
And I would suggest making a plan of what you're going to eat and how much eggnog you're going to drink, because I want you to be safe when you're driving. So, a limited amount of eggnog, and maybe have eggnog at home so you're not excessive. And, maybe your Aunt Susie makes this wonderful pie, and, maybe ask if you can take one piece home so you don't eat two pieces there, because you might be so overstuffed you don't feel too good. But kind of make a plan ahead of time. It makes it
Which is
easier when you make a plan.
That's a very Saturnian way to look at it too. That planning, that not just rushing into the good time without considering how you're going to get home or how you're going to tend to your bodily needs. What is it that can cause you a hard time, that maybe a little planning for will allow you to actually enjoy the more jovial side of the experience. I think that's a very useful way for us to be approaching this right now. And it's a good idea. I find this to be a good practice in general, but I think especially now, it's a good idea to be willing to try to negotiate with our fears. Because especially for those of us, or with our fears, or with our sadness, with the depressive qualities that we may have. If you're having a hard time during this holiday season, find ways to consider what are the things that maybe they're not going to, eliminate your distress entirely, but what are the things that could kind of bring you up just a little bit, or help keep some of the distresses at bay. If you're, say, a person who has some social anxiety and you get invited to a big party, and you want to be able to be social and have that good time with other people, but you also know you get overstimulated, there's too much going on, and it's difficult. So come up with a plan beforehand about how are you going to, what can you do to maybe only arrange that you're only going to be there for a short amount of time. Set things up so that you can have the good experiences in perhaps slightly smaller or more well-paced portions, and that can actually enhance your enjoyment. And so I think that is a real good mantra for all of this. Pace yourself.
That's good. I like that. So we're going to look at, we have this Jupiter square Saturn, and here it's drawn on this chart for December 24th, which is Christmas Eve. And we've talked quite a bit about that. So I think we can go on to the next slide unless you want to talk about it anymore. And we have two T squares, Jupiter square Saturn square Mercury, which we talked about that's the Jupiter square Saturn, but then Mercury touches with that one. And then we have the nodes square the sun that's still active from what we talked about earlier for the solstice. So there's a lot of tension there, and asking for some adjustments. So planning ahead, like we were talking about, I think is a great idea. What would you like to say about this?
Again, with the sun square the nodes, there's that's quality of observing. And the sun is the light of consciousness. Okay. And Capricorn, one of Capricorn's, it can be both both a helpful and a less helpful quality about Capricorn is that Capricorn can be very cautious. Okay. And so, especially with Saturn square Jupiter, then it's important for us to be willing to we're not going to, leap into things. We're going to exercise that measure of caution, but at the same time, not to let our caution hold us back from doing things we might genuinely enjoy that could be genuinely good for us. And so, yeah, I think it's useful for us to have that observational quality, and to be patient, to delay gratification when that is helpful, but not to be depriving ourselves out of fear.
Okay, you ready to go on to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay, and we still have a mystical rectangle going on. with Mars sextile the south node, trine Pluto, sextile the north node, trine Mars. And we had talked about that earlier. So it's still in effect 3 days later here, so on Christmas Eve. So
Well, it will continue to be in effect, I believe, through January 5th. Like I said, the actual Mars-Pluto opposition, I think that's on the 2nd of January. So basically, we've still got another almost 2 weeks of this.
mhm.
And it's definitely useful for us to pay attention to how does our drive work? How does our willpower work in relation to the larger forces in our lives?
And then I put in a chart for the first Jupiter square Saturn. There was a T square with Saturn opposite Venus, square to Jupiter, and then a mini grand trine or a talent trine with Pluto, trine Uranus, sextile Neptune, which has been in effect for quite a while now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of loosening right now, this talent trine, but the outers have been communicating with each other.
Yeah.
So do you want
Yeah,
to say anything about this August square?
yeah, this was the first of these squares. It can be helpful when we're going through something currently that is part of a repeating pattern like this to see what happened before. So this was actually, this was the first day of the Democratic National Convention in the United States. And, all through kind of mid-August, we had the tension of this square, plus, Venus being involved in that. There may have been relationship tensions for people, social tensions that were going on. Now Venus isn't part of the mix. Instead, it's Mercury that is involved. And so it's more about how are we thinking about the tension between the hope and fear in our lives, and how are we communicating that. But there may be some kind of reverberations of experiences that you had in August as a result.
And then the third Jupiter Saturn square, the exact time is June 15th of 2025, and it has a Thor's hammer with Jupiter square Saturn and their sesquiquadrate to Juno. And then there's the mini grand trine with Mars, Jupiter, Chiron, and Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus. There's 2 mini grand trines there. So,
Yeah.
so this will be an interesting one, and
Yeah.
this will be the last of the 3. Because that Thor's hammer, I mean, it's still the square with Jupiter and Saturn, but it's pointing to Juno. So how we are working in our relationships and doing relationships, and that could be, with our friends, with our work companions, or in any number of ways of friends, or how we partner with people.
Well, I very much like to think of Juno in the way that Diana Rose Harper has described, that Juno relates very much to our oaths, to our promises, to the agreements that we make that keep not just interpersonal relationships going, but also our larger relationships. So I very much think of Juno as relating to the social contract. And in Scorpio, it's interesting because Juno. So we see here Juno is retrograde here. Juno's actually in Scorpio right now, if I remember correctly. So we've got this kind of next 6 months where we're looking at Juno, paying attention to emotional undercurrents, the depths of our emotional and intuitive experiences, what's going on deep within our psyches, and what are the power dynamics Scorpio deals a lot with power dynamics and what are the deep, dark, intense stuff of humanity? Politics, yes, religion, psychology, sex, money, and death, transformation, and power. Power and powerlessness. And so Jupiter and Saturn, these two social planets, putting the pressure on our oaths, which here are already, reconsidering what are the power dynamics around us and underneath the surface of things, and what are our deep and intense feelings about all of that. That's quite a configuration there.
Well, it's kind of, to me, it's like, okay, be careful what you commit to or promise, because you might be called on the carpet for what you promised. That could be an issue. So really consider what you're promising or what you're making an oath to. Anything else you want to talk about this chart? Because we'll probably
I would definitely say, oh, go on.
We'll come back in June, I'm sure, and talk about this or before this happens. So we don't have to cover it super in depth, but
yeah, I think that this is a under promise. Don't really be careful about what you are committing to, specifically from the standpoint of taking your promises seriously, and recognizing what might be the contributing factors that could really challenge your ability to keep your word, as well as what are the kind of hidden dynamics that may get revealed as a result of what you promise, and what are the things that you value enough in terms of social connections and these kind of institutionalized connections. So marriage being the most obvious example of that. But also, when we're looking at things like community organizations, for example, those are social institutions that can be greatly affected by, how dedicated are we to keeping them alive through hardship, through difficulty, through challenging interpersonal dynamics. Okay. I think that's something that's going to really come up here. Those two mini grand trines happening at the same time, one of them does involve Jupiter. Okay. And the one that involves Jupiter also involves Mars and Chiron, with Chiron being in a Mars-ruled sign. And I think that, our faith, our hope is going to be in this dynamic with our willpower, our ability to act, but also having to recognize what parts of us feel like they can't carry on. Which would be that Chiron in Aries, who really shows us in particular where we feel like it is difficult to function independently. Okay. We may not be able to maintain our hope and faith if we are dead set on continuing the Western and especially American elevation of individuality and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and all of that. Okay. That is, we've been seeing with Chiron and Aries, we've been seeing how that is harmful. Where does that hurt us? And what about that needs healing? A note that Jupiter at this point is going to be in Cancer, where Jupiter is exalted, but Saturn's going to be in Aries, ruled by that Mars. And Saturn isn't really too keen on being in Aries. That is the sign of Saturn's fall. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. I'm not going to continue to beat this particular horse at the moment, but we definitely should revisit this when we're closer to it.
Absolutely. So, I want to thank everybody for joining us live and those that come back and watch after. And I want to thank you, Madam Simon, for joining me today and recording this. And I look forward to having you back next time because you've been coming on a couple times a month, which I really appreciate. Anything else you want to say, or we can finish up with our last few slides that we have?
Just thank you for having me, as always.
Okay, come back and enjoy more episodes of the Astrology Star Sisters. I do a monthly podcast with Justin, the monthly podcast, the full moon forecast, and a Chiron asteroid series. And the Astrology Star Sisters are doing the dwarf planets, planet stationing, the decans using astrology and tarot, fixed stars, and a new one is Uranian astrology coming up in February. I will be on Talk Cosmos on January 26th, talking about the Aquarius new moon at 1 p.m., and you can watch that on my channel here. I'm going to be at Thrive in 2025 at East West Bookshop in Seattle. And it's about a goal setting, making a vision board, tapping into your superpowers, a ceremony with a world peace flame, and astrology weather report. And to sign up, you go to eastwestseattle.org and it's $15. And that, again, that's on January 1st from 12 to 2:30, and it will be on Zoom. So you can join anywhere in the world. And here's Madam Simon's page, and I'll let her talk about this.
Yes, so I have a Patreon page where I talk about ongoing astrological transits, um, uh, weekly reports that I send out to my patrons, as well as usually a monthly overview, and occasionally some other writing on astrology. But also where I make custom astrological art for my patrons. Primarily, the big ones are the solar return cards, which are pieces of art based upon the what's going on in the skies at the time of your birthday. So I do that there. And then, of course, like Liz, I am a consulting astrologer, and you can book a consultation with me on my website, iconalchemy.com.
And we have gift certificates available for consultations. If you want to gift those to people, just send us an email and we'll tell you how to do all that. And as Simon mentioned, we're both doing consultations and we have newsletters and YouTube channels. And Simon's email, or I'll give you her website, iconalchemy.com, and my website is alightpath.com. And again, thank you everybody for being here, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye for now.